listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
My guest is John Savage, who is a Southampton City Councillor. John is a lifelong Labour supporter with membership since 1987. He has lived in Southampton for more than 13 years, where he's raised his children. As John has been a Southampton City Councillor for more than 4 years, supporting local people in a range of casework and delivering numerous projects across the ward. John has been chair of the Planning and Rights of Way panel and is now cabinet member for Environment and Net Zero. So today we're going to talk about local plans and how they can play a big difference and influence, and our UK pledge, of course, which is to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So welcome to John.
Hi, Hannah. Nice to be talking to you.
So tell us a little bit about what makes you tick, John. What has driven you to pursue a career in politics? Where does that start, and how do you believe you can make change happen?
I'm from Liverpool originally, and I was brought up in a single-parent family. My father left when I was 1. And I suppose I got a real sense of what was fair and what was right from my mother, who brought me up alone until I was actually probably about 8. I've got a slightly complicated background because my mother was married 3 times. I have 2 stepfathers and I have 2 siblings from each of those other fathers. And there's a whole load of stuff that kind of goes with that. But one of the things that got instilled with me in an early age was the issue around travel. My mum worked for the Cunard Shipping Company. In fact, Brocklebank Steamship Company before that. And my first holiday was on a cargo ship. And she used to bring home stamps from the office, and I had them all in my collection book, and it had like an atlas in there as well. And I almost used to sort of travel the world in that way through just looking at the atlas and where all these stamps came from. I ended up the first member of my family to go to university. I'm a bit of a generalist. I started studying a science degree and then ended up doing a politics and history degree. When I finished that, I ended up traveling to Africa and teaching in Sudan a long time ago now. And I actually eventually traveled the length of Africa and traveled all over the place. And I saw an awful lot of injustice. And I felt that sense of fairness that I could shape other people's lives if I made a difference. And I came back to this country, did lots of different jobs since, but a lot of them have been around hopefully making a difference in other people's lives. I was a teacher for 17 years. I worked for 4 years with people with learning disabilities. I've done an awful lot, too much to talk about in this podcast, actually.
So it is really making a difference. That's driving a whole number of factors there about the way your childhood was shaped. Now, we're talking today about climate change and in fact, we're facing climate crisis. What part do you think local government decision-making has to play in changing how we all operate and addressing climate change and seeking those solutions?
It's a really difficult one, this, because I think it's really vital that we set the agenda, the things that are important and the things that we need to do. There's lots of stuff that we are doing and will be doing. Some of them become quite contentious, and it's very difficult operating in the political world where, let's face it, if we want to introduce some kind of a system, let's say a pedestrianisation of an area, and then your opposition are chomping on the bit that we're against cars and so on and so forth. We have to live in a political climate, and we have to try to bring people with us. It's really, really difficult. But there's an awful lot of things that we have been doing and continue to do, things we can do locally, particularly around clean air, our transport policy. We've done an awful lot over the last few years. I'm a little bit sad about the outcome of one particular scheme, the Portswood Broadway scheme, which in the end didn't go through because of we didn't bring the local people with us on that one. But we've development of bus lanes so that we can improve bus travel, more protected cycle lanes. We need to do more of those, but we are increasing the amount of cycling in the city to make it safer for people to get around in different ways. We look at those areas where we've got parts of the city where wards in Southampton, more than half the people who live there haven't got access to a car. And we need to be able to provide appropriate choices for all of those people.
It really is looking at, in terms of local authority, to be very clear, it's influencing that local plan. As you say, the transport planning, you have an influence over development as well. And clean air zones, presumably, as well as those cycle paths and, of course, parking policies around all of that as well.
Absolutely. There's something about all that I have to remember that Southampton was the first city in the country to develop geothermal, transforming the city in the way that we deal with our energy. And we can sell that story really, really well. We've got plans for that going forward. We might talk about that a bit later. We're also a port, and we have an awful lot of emissions that come from our port. And we've got other real problems in the city with regard to electrical supply. And it's actually a really complex issue. And but we can change some of these things, and we can bring people with us. But we're living in an area where political disagreements will happen, and we have had in the past certain parties who I've spoken to in full council who are thinking that climate change doesn't even really exist. It's not an issue for them.
How do you see climate change impacting Southampton and the area around it, for example, in the next 10 to 20 years? Because climate change risks are great. I mean, we're looking at climate change, we're looking at climate crisis, we're looking at climate news on our news most days. How do you see those risks and how it impacts the communities?
We have really good weather in Southampton. I mentioned I came originally from the north of England. We get excellent weather here. It's warm, largely dry, almost a microclimate in its position and location to the Isle of Wight. We get really quite low rainfall. One of the impacts for the city is droughts and very, very high temperatures that are affecting the lives of the people who live here. Fortunately, we are quite a green city in that we've got an awful lot of tree cover, and we need to maintain that and make sure that we plant more trees to have the cooling effect on the city that we want. We've seen the ornamental lake in Southampton Common virtually dry up because of low rainfall and high temperatures. And to be honest with you, also probably needed a little bit more maintenance that we had the money to be able to provide for, so that there was silt there. And the silting causes problems. We had fish that were dying in the lake, and it got smaller and smaller. Unfortunately, we did get some heavy rain shortly afterwards, and we were able to see the lake fill again. But we will see that all over the place, and that will impact lots of things like loss of biodiversity. Certain creatures that are really quite valuable in this city may well die, possibly become extinct. We've got great crested newts on the common in a special area, and it's a very, very precious, rare species that lives there, and we've got so many others as well. Going on to people, maybe much more importantly, we're going to see people who are struggling to be able to live in their homes in a cool fashion. And in winter, they'll be cold. They'll need to be able to heat themselves in drafty, damp-ridden homes, and we need to do something about that. Climate change has a real big effect, and I think one of your other questions that might be coming up relates to impact on the poorest in our communities, because these do affect the poorest people. The poorest people find it most difficult to keep cool, and the most difficult to keep warm in winter. The whole issue to do with that and the rising fuel costs as well, which we've seen with the war in Ukraine, is a massive issue. Climate change is really going to affect us. And that's before we even mention rising sea levels and the impact, particularly in our city centre, which is most at threat, but also on the borders of the River Itchen. We really do need to work with government to have sea defences that can combat that.
Mm-hmm. And that is, you've touched on the heat waves and, of course, the rising sea levels. Now, there was some work, I think, by Climate Central, which looked at the areas that would be underwater in years to come. And you're talking about keeping our homes warm, keeping our homes cool, but you're talking about the rising sea levels. And this report from Climate Central talked about whole areas of Southampton possibly being underwater. I think it mentioned the football club, it mentioned the chapel area of Southampton.
Yes.
And of course, those areas are home to many businesses, hotels, etc. And that's a large part of your economy. Do you see that that must be part of your crisis planning?
It really is. I'm so concerned about it. Mm-hmm. I took time out to catch the Minister for Rivers and Floods, Emma Hardy, to impress upon her the need that we we have to release funds to support plan, which has already been sorted out. Actually, it's called the River Itch and Flood Alleviation Scheme. And it's a big scheme. It's got quite a big price tag on it as well, to move forward and defend the city. There was a plan. I think the government was struggling to work out where all that money was going to be coming from. My mission in my conversation with her was to discuss whether the priority of it, that it should be for the national government to sort this out. And I'm having follow-up discussions with Emma and her team, and also with the Environment Agency. What's all wrapped up into this? It's quite a complex picture, but we know that businesses want to come and make their headquarters in Southampton. There's two things that are preventing them. One of them is the shortage of electrical supply for the whole city. We don't have a big enough cable coming in from the national grid to be able to supply us with the energy needs of the city going forward. And they're also worried about the risk of flooding in those areas where they may want to develop. And we've got a catch-22 situation where, at the moment, the government's view on it is that the River Itch and Flood Alleviation Scheme can be largely supported through development funds that would come in from developers. So a developer would come in, build a building, and then they get SIL money or Section 106 money. It's money that comes from the developer to improve the local environment and local infrastructure. My feeling on it is that that's a very difficult ask, and that's what I've been busy on, and working very hard with our MPs on that as well. I think we can get there, and we may be able to get money from various wealth funds and things to be able to sort that out. But the national agenda for this government is growth, and this city is poised to have really solid green growth. But we also need that investment to defend our infrastructure.
And of course, the other thing you need are targets. And we've got a lot of targets. We read a lot and we hear a lot about 2050 targets, 2030 targets, 2045 targets, depending on, where you are. Do you think our emissions reduction targets are realistic? Because Southampton City Council has set a target to achieve, I think, 2035 for the city, with a specific aim for the council itself to be net zero by 2030. And they're part of the city's Green City Charter and Plan, which is part of the council's corporate plan 2022-2030. How realistic are these?
I'm a glass half full kind of person, and I'm fairly optimistic, but I've no doubt that these are difficult targets. There are certain things in the pipeline which I think can help. I mentioned about the electrical supply. It's very difficult for us to decarbonise without the electrical supply that we need, the green, clean electrical supply that we need for the city. It's very difficult for people to buy EV cars if they've got nowhere to charge them. Similarly with the buses. The buses in Southampton would like to be battery-powered buses. The cruise industry would really like to be able to plug into shore power. At the moment, we have two shore power facilities, but if we were to switch them both on at once, the lights would go off in the city. We haven't got the electrical supply. I'm working very hard at the moment with Scottish and Southern, who are our network operator, to provide all this. And I've been, every opportunity I get to meet with them and lean on them to improve the pace of change, we're doing that. I also had a meeting that was organised by Satveer Kaur MP and Alan Whitehead, who was the former Shadow Secretary of State for Energy, I think. We organised a kind of a coalition of the willing, and Scottish and Southern were there, along with a whole load of other players, to come together to have a determination to deliver what we need in the next couple of years. We mentioned before about geothermal energy. That's sort of sitting in the background at the moment. It's very old and it's not really delivering an awful lot for us. But it's been identified by scientists that there is more energy there if we were to sort that out. And by going to market, we could do another borehole down to about 2 kilometres, I think, which could deliver steam, which will not only heat an enlarged district network from geothermal heating system, but also provide energy from a turbine that could be turned with the steam that's produced from that. We've already got companies who have already decided where that borehole will be, and got plans in place to provide that investment, and that's coming forward very quickly. we're right at a pivotal point here. If we can get the electricity in as soon as possible, if we can get geothermal going as soon as possible, I think our targets will be much more attainable. There are an awful lot of other things we're doing at the moment within the council. Big plans on waste reduction for the council itself by 2030. For example, we would want to decarbonise our entire vehicle fleet. Well, we've got an awful lot of smaller electric vehicles at the moment. Bin lorries, let's call them at the moment, are quite old and outdated, but we are replacing those. The anticipation is to fuel them with what's called HVO, hydrogenated vegetable oil, which is a 90% carbon reduction, because if you like, this vegetable oil has already grown. It's taken CO2 out of the air through its growth, and then you're burning that to drive your vehicles around. I think we'd go to battery operated vehicles at a later date. It's not quite sorted in the refuse fleet to move to all electric unless you're in the very flat areas. So many other things. I don't know if you know anything about the extended producer responsibility that's being extended now to the waste area, which means that producers who produced cardboard packaging and a wide range of packaging are ultimately responsible for the cost of its disposal and the carbon that's on that disposal. And that's just being introduced into UK waste.
Now, we mentioned people, obviously, because we're a community, and it is about making lives better and making difference. And we started the conversation up right at the beginning about making change, making a difference to people's lives, because as we've said, that the people who are often impacted most by climate are the ones who can least afford it. And there are many statistics I quote, which I will not at the moment. But how can you ensure for your residents in Southampton, let's start with Southampton, that to ensure that the low income and most vulnerable residents are protected in all of this conversation? Because it all sounds terribly exciting when we talk about the innovation, the technologies we're driving forward to get to these targets. But we can't forget our most vulnerable.
The biggest issue for low income families is housing. An awful lot of people who are living in the private rented sector, and the reluctance of landlords to do anything particularly sustainable with their own properties to continue to take the rent off low income families. Some of this will really be at a national level, but we really need to have changes to the way that the private rented sector operates, so that people are entitled to live in clean and environmentally friendly homes. Also, we've got programs going forward now on our housing. We haven't had for some time, but we want to help to develop not just with council houses, but also with with other companies, work in partnership with housing associations. But my ambition really would be that we have the development of more zero energy homes, highly insulated homes that have got solar panels on them and air heat pumps as a standard, and the really good practice is developed across the whole sector. But we need legislation from national government. If somebody's renting out a home in that state to somebody, it just shouldn't be allowed to happen. I think there was some legislation that was planned maybe about a year or so ago, I recall, that all rented properties had to reach a minimum energy level of efficiency. And I think that's been pushed back now. But we really, really do need that kind of thing. I'd like to see every home that gets built has solar panels on it. And we do encourage a lot of solar purchases in Southampton. We have a scheme called Solar Together. And I think it's a Hampshire-wide scheme where we're offering some degree of sort of risk avoidance for people, because they know that if they're going to get a solar scheme, they're going to get it in coordination with their local authority. And then it's working with tradespeople that you can trust. You're not going to get ripped off. We need to do more of that. We need to have more and more of it across the piece. I think the thing about people who are on low incomes is, and I see a lot of this where people will be cycling to work and using public transport. We need to work with the bus companies to keep bus costs down. And I think there's things like, if you are doing a regular commute, and if you have, you can get a monthly bus pass or even an annual bus pass, you can get it very, very reduced fares compared to, paying it one off. We currently have it's part of a national scheme. It's been around for a while now, but all nighttime fares are £1. We just need to keep making sure that public transport, your bike and your wheels and your feet are a really safe and easy way to get around.
And making that all come together, that nighttime economy, allowing people to get to work at minimal cost, do their jobs. And of course, going back to those homes. And we again, at Salix, we have played a role in the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, delivering that, and the Home Upgrade Grant, which is all about putting renewable solar PV heat pumps into people's homes and making them places where people want to be, that places that are safe, that children can do their homework. You don't have to be out all day just to keep warm. And that's really important for the whole well-being, isn't it, of everybody. So just for a moment, let's talk about some of the positives, because in this whole conversation, there's the opportunity of jobs, isn't there? Green jobs and of course, all the technologies, because it kind of makes sense. And I've spoken to one of my guests recently, and he said, well, economics is on our side. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it, to go green in terms of jobs and economy?
Absolutely. I think I've actually seen this when we're talking about pension schemes. That an awful lot of authorities are moving out of petrochemical shares and into green technology shares because actually they provide a better return on investment. It's really important. We're very well placed in Southampton with the 2 universities that we've got. An awful lot of work going on there. Lots of things that are going on in the Porter area and National Oceanography Centre. And that we're really working to develop some of these new green jobs. I did hear a conference, somebody said, don't talk about new green industries, just call them as new industries, because sometimes you almost toxify the name by referring them to as green. These are just new ways of working, and they're really exciting. There's lots of jobs that we can develop out there. I have spoken to local colleges about apprenticeships and training that is available to move into the electric heat pumps and solar panel installation. Maybe more importantly, we need really good construction industry where people are building with new materials. I visited these kind of homes of the future. They don't build them with bricks and mortar, of course, with the firing of bricks alone, the amount of carbon that's embedded in the production of those things. These things are very, very wide walls, maybe that thick, insulated materials that last an awful long time, incredibly lightweight. So when you put them on the back of a lorry, huge walls, you get a whole house onto a single lorry, and it doesn't use an awful lot of electricity to drive around on it. These are incredibly efficient. And we need to be moving forward with more of those. I'm also conscious, because I did used to chair planning. One of the things that bothers me is the idea that we have a building that's been up for maybe 20 years and we knock it down, we build another one out of steel and concrete again. I would like to see more changes where we can retrofit existing buildings to be able to extend their life even more, rather than just knocking things down and building with concrete over and over again. We're very, very well placed in this part of the country. I mean, we have got Fawley oil terminal on our doorstep, and I'd like to see more work going on there to sort of change the nature of the industries to take place there. There's a whole new investment going into the Freeport, and the idea of Freeport is that when that investment goes in, part and parcel of that and the funding that goes into it and the businesses that are encouraged to operate there should be green and environmentally friendly industries and businesses that operate out of there. We've got an awful lot of scope to be able to clean up our dirty oil industry into something that's cleaner. Working with hydrogen has a bit of a bad name at the moment because it takes much more energy to produce hydrogen, which is a clean fuel, but it takes an awful lot more energy to be able to produce it than just delivering straightforward electricity down the wire to people. I was a bit disappointed on the carbon capture and storage schemes. The Solent cluster came together a couple of years ago to build capacity to develop more and more carbon capture and storage. I think the funding at that time went to the north of England, both to the northwest and the northeast. I think the infrastructure in, deep sea mines under the North Sea were sort of more suitable for that sort of technology. But we do have the capacity here to do likewise. And we've also got, the capacity for a double tidal range. We could introduce tidal here as well as wind power.
So definitely a place to watch very carefully. So I'm hoping you'll come again and talk to us, post about all of the work that has been achieved. One final question, because we really are running out of time, John, but I would like to ask very briefly is we spend a lot of time in these podcasts talking about global issues, talking about how technologies can have an impact, a positive impact, how people are living and addressing climate change issues. But I like to kind of throw the question back as well at our guests and ask you, what sacrifices have you made in your life to address climate change? Have you made any sacrifices, and would you say you lead a sustainable lifestyle?
I cycle an awful lot. I always have done. I've certainly moved away. I do own a car, but I think it's quite a small engine car. I've had it for quite a long time, and at the moment, keeping it on the road seems to be the greenest thing I can do. My next car I would be electric, but I've got an e-bike, so I travel all over the place. I've cycled several times to Brighton, for example, and I've always been very interested in cycling. So I also I cycled down through Europe. I cycled to Spain one year, not on an electric bike, but on a standard bike. My current bike is an e-bike because I'm getting on a bit. I've given up an awful lot of the flying I used to do. I went about 5 years without getting on an airplane. I've got solar on my roof. And next time I will be moving, getting my gas boiler out and moving over to an electric heat pump as soon as is really possible.
Those are all good steps. I'm not saying that we can all cycle all around Europe, but I think those are really positive steps. So thank you very much to John. Thank you very much to John for joining me today and for providing such insight. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels and email us with any ideas and views at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk. Thank you very much to John. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
You've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.